Our next question is from Chris from Kentucky. Hi, Dr. Ryder, they write. My uncle once told me he went to a club in Chicago in the 60s and saw the blues legend Robert Johnson play. But he died in 1938, and he never made it up to Chicago. Nevertheless, my uncle swears he saw him. Do you know how this could be? Chris, I do believe I know what your uncle saw. For a while, from sometime in the 50s through the 70s, there was a popular tourist theater in South Loop called A Look and a Voice. Every night, the marquee would read the name of someone famous. Louis Armstrong, Cab Calloway, Robert Johnson, as you mentioned, being three of the most common names to appear. Most locals knew something funny was going on at the club, but just assumed cover performers or imitators were looking to trick tourists out of a few bucks. But by all accounts, the man who performed at the club, at least our best guesses say it was a single man, as no matter who was performing, they always had a large mole on their left nostril, had some sort of supernatural talent. One that allowed him to mimic the physical appearances and voices of these performers. It said he could play the same instrument to the same standard as the person he was imitating as well. It's unclear if that was also a supernatural gift or came about through disciplined practice. Whoever this musical mimic was, they kept their true identity a secret, never made themselves known. Perhaps they feared lawsuits or just drawing too much attention. At some point in the 70s, they disappeared, at least from A Look and a Voice. I'm afraid I don't really have any more information. I will say, though, if you go into nearly any Chicago record shop, you'll find bootleg copies of performances from the club. Hope that answers your question. Our last question this evening comes from Liz, who writes, Dr. Ryder, at a yard sale, I bought this beautiful little wooden box. When I got home, I realized it had a false bottom, and inside was a deck of cards. They're like a tarot deck with a major arcana and different suits, but not a normal tarot deck. The suits on the cards match the dark metaphysics, shadows, spirits, dreams, etc. What did I find? Liz, I'm embarrassed to say you found the initial source of my own family's modest wealth. I take it you didn't examine the small print on the box, or perhaps you have the cards and not the box, or the booklet that used to accompany the cards. But if you have either, in big painted letters you'll see the words, Metaphysical Fortune Cards. And in far smaller print you'll read, Created and Illustrated by Patricia Ryder, who was my great-great-grandmother. She made quite the name for herself around the turn of the last century. She'd travel across the country and hold court in graveyards, speaking to the dead and conveying their messages to the living. She found the way the dead spoke to her difficult to understand. Often they'd merely talk in images. She codified the most common ones she received into a deck of cards she could use as a tool. Later, she was asked to manufacture these so others might try to commune with the dead as she did, or at least pretend to, in parlor rooms and at parties. Over 2 million packs of cards were sold in the early half of the 20th century. When the rights to them passed on to my great-grandfather, my grandfather Duncan's father, he refused to allow them to be manufactured further. He had no gift for speaking to the dead himself. He had no supernatural talents at all, and like my own parents, chose to live a more mundane life. He was embarrassed about our family's legacy and wanted to do everything he could to disassociate the Ryder name from the supernatural. Of course, the infamy his own son would achieve in World War II, and what came after, made that impossible. The cards have 6 suits, as you mentioned, matching the dark metaphysics: shadow, mirror, flesh, spirit, memory, and dream. Like a tarot deck, there are 22 major arcana cards, but 60 minor as opposed to the usual 56. Other than the Tower, there are no overlapping major arcana cards from the tarot. All other major arcana in the Metaphysical fortune deck are unique to it. The shadow unbound, the hidden king on his ancient throne, dreams forgotten. According to family legend, great-great-grandmother Patricia hated the name Metaphysical fortune cards. She thought it insipid. I believe what she initially asked the manufacturer to call them was something akin to the Dictionary of the Dead. But they thought that too morbid. I hope that gives you some sense of what you unintentionally purchased, Liz. If your deck didn't come with instructions, or you find you're missing any cards, let me know. I have dozens of packs sitting in a box in my attic. And that's all for questions tonight.